hiring. For some, it's a necessary evil. You know you need to scale your team and you know you've got to find the right people, but do we actually go through the right strategies and the right methods to do that? And I can tell you, I've been guilty of not doing that, especially after talking with Beth Nevins. She is amazing. She's with Developa, and basically she has a strategy and an exact plan to make sure that you're hiring the right person at the right time. And so she actually works with companies to make sure that they're not missing this or losing out on this from a talent perspective and identify what they need to bring in. She walks us through exactly what you should do when you're ready to start hiring so that you can get the best top talent for what you can afford. And really, I love her model. So check this out. She really has a lot of great stuff to share.
Welcome to Scale Your SaaS, the podcast that gives you proven techniques and formulas for boosting your revenue and achieving your dream exit. Brought to you by a guy who's done just that multiple times. Here's your host, Matt Wolach.
Hello and welcome to Scale Your SaaS. Thank you very much for being here, by the way. We are super excited to have you. This is a show to help you scale your SaaS, do exactly what it says. So if you want to drive more leads, if you want to make sure that you're closing those leads, if you want to scale your team, hire the best people to do that, these are the episodes for you. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're going to help you grow through putting you in front of amazing creators, innovators, and leaders throughout the SaaS industry. And we've got one of those today that I'm super excited about. I'm here with Beth Nevins. Beth, how you doing?
I'm good. This is the most enthusiastic intro I've ever seen, so I'm very excited about this conversation.
Well, great. I teach my clients to be very passionate when they're talking with their prospects, so I hope that I embody that. So thank you very much for saying that. Beth, let me make sure everybody knows who you are because you're awesome. So founder and CEO at Developa.io. Beth, she's an accomplished leader in the people and talent space. Transitioning from a stellar career in agency recruitment to leading in-house people and talent strategies in startups, Beth has gained a wealth of experience that equips her to understand startup needs swiftly and offer specific guidance and advice. Developa is a people and talent consultancy with deep expertise and experience operating in and supporting startups backed by Tiger Global, Sequoia, Target Global, Balderton, and Atomico. So she absolutely knows her stuff, and we're so glad to have her. Beth, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, and I hope that turns out to be true on this chat. But yeah, great. Well, I'm Beth, as you know. I'm based in the UK and pretty relatively new as a consultancy in this space of people and talent. We support seed to Series C tech startups. That is our demographic, pretty early stage, and they do have different needs at different stages. And there's three sort of core services. We're quite full stack intentionally because we care about staying longer with less clients. So our sort of entry point typically is on the candidate front across commercial, engineering and product, and then supporting more on the strategy consulting on the systems design as they start scaling. And then, of course, coaching, which is much more about the investment into high performance for the founder, but also the leadership team as well. And that's us.
Awesome. I'm excited to dive into all of that, but I want to go way back. So where did this whole idea come from? How did you say this needs to happen?
Yeah. I mean, we're at a really interesting point generally, and I'll get onto that. But my depth is as a recruitment agent. And when I started off out of university, the agency I started on only specialized in tech, but more interestingly, in the startup space. So I was working with co-founders early stage from 22 years of age, it's very, very early on.
We'll be right back. Game changer in lead generation, Lead Feeder. One thing that's super frustrating when I work with clients is driving traffic to their website, but then not knowing who those visitors are. You can't tell who these companies are, but guess what? There is a tool and it's changing the game and supercharging your lead gen. It's called Lead Feeder. Now imagine having the power to identify companies visiting your website, track their behavior in real time, and seamlessly integrate it all with your CRM. Lead Feeder is not just a tool. This thing is your secret weapon for efficient and targeted lead engagement. Now, what sets Lead Feeder apart? It's the ability to provide detailed insights into visitor behavior, helping your sales team prioritize efforts and close deals faster. This thing's got customizable notifications, lead scoring, GDPR compliance. It's loaded. Lead Feeder is really changing the game. If you're ready to revolutionize your approach to leads and deals, head over to leadfeeder.com for your free demo today. That's LEADFEEDER.com. Don't miss out on the future of successful lead lead generation with Lead Feeder. And we're back.
And on that side, I learned a lot about the dimensions of what they needed, the pain points, and so forth. But eventually I got headhunted and then moved on the other side internally, working and reporting directly into those founders. And there's just a wealth of insights you just don't see, as an agent. So I gained all of that experience and then organically broadened my experience just out of talent, but much more so operationally then on people operations, leadership development, reward strategy, and so forth. And I kind of got to a point where I'd worked in full stack deep tech, AI, I'd worked in fintech, very, very different models, loved both of them. And I was advising other startups for free during that time as well. So I had quite a big network. And given that we are, moving out of this grow at all costs era into much more conscious scaling, why now? Focusing on high performance and intentional people and talent strategy is now more important than ever. So the timing was great to really, give that value to get more out of the existing teams that we currently have and really double down now on what a player actually means to companies in this new conscious era of scaling and growing rather. And for me also, I was at a point in my life where I built a lot of experience and made a lot of mistakes. And I now make many out of those mistakes by sharing those stories. That's the value you can bring as an advisor. And, I had a lot of founders that I already was connected with. And the thing that came back to my purpose constantly was I love helping founders win. I'm a massive believer in entrepreneurship. It's all I'm going to do. It's all I'm ever going to do. I'll retire still probably doing startup stuff. It was a great time for me. It just felt right to go off and do this at a more portfolio level.
That's so cool. I love that story. I want to understand because you talked about that high performer, the top talent. So what strategies are you finding right now most effective in attracting and retaining top talent in this really competitive market?
Yeah, I think, there's all the obvious academic stuff which I can run through, but I think the big problem I find is understanding your definition of actually what an A player is. And you see so much content about this, which is great with different definitions, but for me, there's only one definition, and I go back to Jeff Smart in his book, Why, the A Guide. I can't remember the whole title of it. I'll remind you at the end. Something like the A Guide to Hiring, or the Who, A Guide to Hiring. And an A player definition is, what is the best talent we can get with the money we've got to pay? It's as simple as that. And this is where you need advice on what are the best skills and where can you find it at that price point, plus then your values alignment to that market match. And that's never done very well. So it's been doubling down on that very, very simple formula intentionally now and bringing that together early stage in a founding team so that can then, scale beyond that. And then more on the academic side, the framework is, what is your candidate persona? So what does your ideal candidate look like? What's their motivations? Where is that audience and so forth? And then you can build your value prop. So what are the things we want to double down on to appeal to the very talent we actually want? So that is a strategy in itself. And then there's more granular things that attract talent, like, I'm hiring top tier engineers for a client right now. And honestly, the reason they're applying is they said, what an amazing job spec. The little details actually matter in recruitment. And it's the detail-oriented people that usually win. So that's really important. And then you've got branding. And the reason for that is when you're looking at cost per hire, typically what you're trying to think about over time is how do you move from where you usually start, which is high sourcing and more of a higher cost strategy because you're trying to just get talent through agents or just a sourcing strategy versus then more of an inbound strategy where you can turn it into high caliber inbound generation over time. So how does that play out is something also to double down on the attraction piece. And then a tactical move, which I think a lot of startups don't do enough of, is leveraging your top performers. So let's say your top performers are doing 200% output compared to the average. What's the 300%? The 300% is actually using them in your attraction strategy, whether that's referrals or personal branding, shouting out about, talent and whatever you've got, career site-wise and so forth. And leveraging them then as part of the interview process because they're probably statistically better at evaluating talent or identifying similar traits to what makes them so great in that process. And then the last thing on attraction, I'd say, is it depends on the founder and what the founder needs. But this is an education piece, is explaining to them, okay, top talent, and I don't mean passive, I mean proper headhunting, like absolutely got no interest of moving right now. The amount of effort you need to sell, and appreciate that within a couple of conversations, they may not, the switch may not have, twigged yet, because they want to do their own homework and it's a bit more intentional. If you're not prepared or understand that is how that, a player market can work, so that you can literally go to a company and I want that one, and you actually can get it, and that's what it takes, versus, okay, we just want everybody to fall in love with us from the second they speak to us. Then that means that your attraction strategy is going to be more palatable or more logically aligned to an applicant channel. So, there's all those conversations you have with founders then on that big attraction piece that, you go back and forth and find somewhere in the middle, or try and test very quickly that can work. But that is generally the main dimensions early stage that you start considering.
What I'm getting from this, and I hope all the audience is as well, is the amount of stuff and thought and focus and strategy you just went through. Like I've run several companies, I've hired a lot of people, and I've never gone through that level. And just to hear an expert like yourself talk about here's the right way to approach it, just totally proves your value right away. Like I'm like, yeah, I met this guy on LinkedIn. He looks cool. All right, let's go. And the way that you're focused on exactly how to, I just love that. So I hope that everybody is listening to that. And one of the things you said also, Beth, was, in hiring an engineer, a lot of times, if you're not a tech person, hiring those kind of crazy unfamiliar roles within the tech industry can be difficult. So how can business leaders overcome a challenge like that?
Yeah, I mean, this happens a lot, right? Because the whole point of startups is you're usually making decisions and working in an environment that you've never seen before, particularly if you're a first-time founder or, you're a disruptor or whatever. And it's the same often then with hiring. So if we're thinking about unfamiliar roles, it can be, a first role in the department. So that's like a new creation thing that's going on. It can be a role that no one's ever hired before. So it's new for the company. It's a first role, whether it's a principal engineer and we don't have one yet or whatever. So it's not more of the same roles that we've got. Or it can be like a super niche role that not only is it new to us, but many other companies don't have this role either. And it's a very small talent pool consequently. So they're kind of the angles that often crop up then in this unfamiliar sort of space. And for me, I go back to a few discussions then with the founders and the hiring team is, okay, so what is the reason we're hiring this role? So go back to the why, like what is the pain points here? Because sometimes when you've got unfamiliar territory, the gap that we have can be filled in other ways, actually. It might not even be a hire. So that's the first qualification aspect we go through. But the second core question to unfamiliarity is milestone fits. And what I mean by this is, what does this role actually need to do in the next 12 months that we can absolutely slap bang say, we know this role made sense? And the reason I say that, and it's less perhaps on the tech side, but I'll give you an example. A founder comes to me and goes, I need chief of staff. Okay, fine. The whole definition of this role, new role for them, was on responsibilities, which is great. But we dug into those two questions I just told you. And I said, okay, chief of staff by definition is to make the founder CEO more effective. That is basically the objective of what that role is. And they either classically come from an EA background on the one side, or the other side is more generalist consulting that can turn their hands to most strategy things and figure things out. Well, we doubled down on this founder actually had a very clear view on the milestone was actually go-to-market strategy and business development and sales was their gap. So even though we said, okay, titles can stay as they are, we've now got a very different role description consequently. And now a very, very, very specific targeted candidate market we want to go after because there is an actual milestone and a pain point here that hasn't been thought through in the initial job spec. And this happens all the time. Another one, I had a company in Germany last year who came to the COO role. They were so early stage. I said, why do you need a COO? Because they're mostly executing through teams as opposed to being a purist individual contributor. And they were pretty early stage. So we kind of went through again those same two questions. And then the answer was, Okay, right. So the big problem is product market fit. I've been working with you for several weeks now. We haven't really moved much forward with the product and the discovery or hypothesis. So we have a problem here. So actually, we need to fill this product gap more important than this COO role that you're saying. But what we're also recognizing is you're worried about you need some time off because you've got other things going on in your life, which means we need to cover that gap too. But it's not really a COO full-time role. So this happens a lot. And then once you get through that bit, you're then looking at who should source this role if none of you have done this before and it's very unfamiliar or super niche. And I think the default is, well, great, we've got an internal recruitment team, so we'll just, put it there. And, that's fine. They're really smart and they do have some specialism in this space. But if they also, your actual recruiting capability, don't have knowledge of the role in this space and it's unfamiliar to them, you've got a twofold approach then. You can either then outsource it to people who are experts in that vertical, and that's what they're paid to do, and that needs to be thought about. Or the second one, at the very least, then bring in some advisory people who have maybe been in that role that the board can refer or someone you trust can recommend to be part of that experience or evaluation that can help you build out that process and give some insight. And the third point then within familiar roles in the strategy, which I see doesn't happen that often, is then the pattern recognition. So what happens with some founders is they will use that throughput and the actual experience of the candidates coming through against that role to be their pattern recognition of learning about the role and what then does good and so forth look like. Now, that's okay, but it's a high-risk strategy because of many reasons. One, you might not recognize great in the beginning.
We'll be right back. Game changer in lead generation, lead feeder. One thing that's super frustrating when I work with clients is driving traffic to their website, but then not knowing who those visitors are. You can't tell who these companies are, but guess what? There is a tool and it's changing the game and supercharging your lead gen. It's called Lead Feeder. Now imagine having the power to identify companies visiting your website, track their behavior in real time, and seamlessly integrate it all with your CRM. Lead Feeder is not just a tool. This thing is your secret weapon for efficient and targeted lead engagement. Now, what sets Lead Feeder apart? It's the ability to provide detailed insights into visitor behavior, helping your sales team prioritize efforts and close deals faster. This thing's got customizable notifications, lead scoring, GDPR compliance. It's loaded. Lead Feeder is really changing the game. If you're ready to revolutionize your approach to leads and deals, head over to leadfeeder.com for your free demo today. That's LEADFEEDER.com. Don't miss out on the future of successful lead generation with Lead Feeder. And we're back.
And then they're gone because you've then done so many comparisons down the line that 3 or 4 or 5 weeks later, you kind of now get the penny of what this role really means, and they've gone. The recruiter gets annoyed because they're having to wait and do a lot of this back and forth, waiting for you to kind of upskill yourself on the position. And you may miss candidates in the market of what you've been looking at, finding out then down the line what you're really looking for. So I always say, okay, try and forecast a little bit earlier, always be recruiting, always learn about roles, benchmark, have a sense check of what might make sense in terms of your direct reports, and follow Brian Chesky's rule. So Brian Chesky does lots of podcasts, obviously, and he talks about this a lot. In the early days, he spoke to tens and tens and tens of people who'd done this role that he was thinking about hiring for to build up his own pattern recognition of what this role actually did before he went off hiring. And that's really, really, really important. So that's the kind of three-prong approach of, go back to your why and your milestones, have an idea of outsourcing or the actual sourcing approach to get that bit right and de-risk, and build up your pattern recognition on different roles that are likely to report into you before you go off and test the market. Yeah.
I love it. So much gold here, Beth. And one thing in particular that really, it's such important stuff. But one thing I really want to call out actually mirrors what we teach within the sales process. You talked about how a leader came to you and said, hey, we really need this COO, right? We need this thing. But a true guide, a true consultant, and in sales, we're trying to be very consultative. So everybody who's been following me for a while should be seeing those types of messages. you said, wait, hold on, let's identify, is this really what is needed right now? And from the sales side, when somebody comes to us and say, hey, we're struggling with this, we need to be good enough to understand, is that really the thing, or is there something else? Because our goal is not just to solve what they think they need, but to solve whatever they need. And you're doing a great job of making sure that those leaders understand what the real challenge is and who they might need more. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, like, because goes back to your point, solve the problem. Like, it may not even be that you are the solution, but if you solve the problem on that call or through the framework, you've added value, and that's all you can do as a good consultant, right? So I agree. Yeah.
And you actually usually get referrals from those people, even if you send them, I think you need this or that instead. Then they'll usually tell people, hey, go to this person, you're going to love them. And I think it's great because you just built so much trust. You just showed, I'm not trying to sell you, I want to help you. And so because of that trust, they're going to make sure other people get to you. So tell me, I know that this is, important to make sure we're always doing the right thing, but what mistakes are software leaders making right now around their hiring process?
There's lots, obviously, they do right. So I always caveat when you talk about mistakes because, I actually don't think we talk enough about some of the good things that they do, and it's always well intended, right? But the common mistakes I do see is, if I think about this a little bit. So first one, which is the most common, is the technical assessment seduction. And what I mean by this is, if your technical assessment comes first before anything else, or pretty early on in the stage, which face value makes logical sense. If this candidate is amazing, technical, hero, then they go into more culture-related questions or values or meet the team or whatever, and then there's some red flags and so forth. What you end up finding in what we call the interview wash-up or the calibration is then this really difficult conversation and sometimes, conflict or trying to win or competitive, where the line manager really wants to hire them because they're just so good. And it's so hard to get these people, it's really hard to get people to pass tech tests, right? So that's really difficult. So my recommendation, and I've made this mistake myself, even in process design. So this again is coming from not me being, first time, right time person, is to put the more values and the attitude interview first, and then look at your technical assessment later on, because, ultimately hiring for attitude is what makes us win ultimately, right? So that's really key. And then I think that the wider, the hard challenge when you're hiring for engineers early stages is the wider dimensions, and how do we look at everything that's important, and then the trade-offs and how important coding and technical excellence fits into that. Because let's say you're early stage, it's not just coding, it's like 0 to 1 and appropriate systems design that fits into 0 to 1. It's product chops, because you have to work very closely with product early on, or there may not be even a product manager and you've got a co-founder product person leading. It's having to really be able to understand business value, which a lot of excellent coders not always necessarily can communicate that part really well. And that's really important. So where do we fit in all of that assessment at the same time, so we don't just get completely, our universe is just all around the coding, that we miss out some of these other dimensions that, are almost equally, if not sometimes more important than like a perfect code. Or if someone hasn't used the language straight away, but they are a great engineer, and the reality is maybe a week, 2 weeks in, they pick that up. We have to be careful as how much that purism around the language is important for the role that we have. So that's kind of the other big discussion that we usually go through. And then I would say, it doesn't apply just to software leaders, but it applies to everyone. But is then the practical assessment that's actually relevant? So there's no point having a really strong mathematical algorithmic sort of R&D type exercise if actually we're in like a pure play software engineering business and that's what we actually need, or just a problem to solve and not any sort of relevant to the work sort of exercise, or marketplace relevant exercise is very different to maybe latency, security, other issues you might be thinking about in an exercise for a fintech or a high performance trading platform, for example. So that bit is also important, that I've sometimes gone in and seen I've seen bottle exercises and all sorts of different things. It just doesn't really match up to what we're trying to assess for here on the exercise. And then contentious point that is on diversity. So this is always a challenge of whether we do take homes or how we compress technical due diligence, or blind exercises or not, because that's always a hot topic in the candidate market. And in my role, it's to represent the candidate, not just the hiring manager, and broker those together so that the placement can actually get done, right? Because we all want that common goal. And, you hear the candidate feedback often, and the minute you say like you've got to do a 5-6 hour exercise, they're like, nope. And parents often even more so. So you have to remember that aspect of it too. So, you have to make sure, as I said, like things fit the value prop or the way that you'll position yourselves fits the actual things that you want, on many dimensions. And then I suppose the last one is on time. It's less about a software leader finding this problem, because I think if you're an experienced hiring manager, time to hire is absolutely critical. They feel the pain of the competition. They've had dropouts, they've had offers gone. So it's less on that. But if you've got non-technical people supporting the interview part of a developer or a software engineer, they don't recognize that this market works very differently to a lot of other markets. This is probably one of the most competitive markets when you're looking at software engineers compared to non-tech. So their time and their agility and thinking about that process and their input is a very different way that they have to think when they work with me on that, if they're part of that process, than if they're hiring for, to be honest, HR or, a different type of role. Where there's more abundance against the supply and demand is slightly different. So, that's what I would say on all of that.
I love it. It's such great stuff. And I'm hoping that people are pausing, going back, taking notes, because it's really, really important when you want to hire and scale your team. But we're running out of time here. So quickly, what advice would you give to an early stage software leader who's like, okay, I'm ready to start growing?
Early stage software leader. I mean, look, all the problems early stage come back to hiring and talent. And, talking super early stage, you've got more people problems as you scale and grow. So I won't get into that too much, but I think, it goes back to summarize, like, do your homework on the role, understand what that A player is, and have a strategy to understand what's the best value for money you can get, and so forth. The second thing, which is more general to software leaders, but I would say be smart on your budget. So it's better to have a smaller team, paying that bit more for T-shaped or hybrid people, or people that can turn their hands at multiple things, have a high sense of action and urgency, versus compressing your average salary down for a load of B players, but you think you've got 12 people and you think happy days. So I always say less is more, but pay and price properly for less, smaller team, but super, 10x type people. And then the third thing is understand your sector and dynamic. So I've done this many times with software businesses. So, I don't want to sweep and generalize here, but just be very mindful. If you're new and you're in a fintech and it's super fast paced versus maybe you're hiring a load of people from a different sector that's much slower, or they're not in a company that's disrupting a slower sector, just be very mindful of the environment dimension of the roles that you're hiring. In terms of the nature of where your sector is and how that tends to operate. And it's sweep and generalization. There are certainly outliers within that, but just be mindful of that if you're not assessing on that environment piece of where they're coming from. It is, often where I see things sometimes don't match in like a fintech versus a somewhere else versus an R&D type company versus X, Y, and Z. So, that's also important to consider. But they're like the three key talent areas I would leave as my parting advice.
Very awesome and such great stuff. So I really appreciate you doing that and sharing all that with us. I want to make sure people know where they can connect with you, Beth. So how best can people find you and Developer?
Well, my primary channel is LinkedIn because I'm B2B. So you can find Beth Nevins, Developer, on LinkedIn. And I post lots of snippets and, anecdotes about my lessons learned every couple of weeks or so. So, yeah, please follow me there. That is the best way to contact me. And I pretty much live in LinkedIn these days. So I start with one channel and then diversify after I mastered that.
Perfect. Very good. That's where I live as well. But we'll put all that into the show notes. So if you're watching or listening, you'll be able to see that in the notes. But Beth, this has been fantastic. Thanks for coming on and sharing all this.
Well, thank you so much. And if we talk again, I'd love to hear more on your opinions on some of those as well. But what would be your one bit of advice from your lesson learned? That's my last parting question to you.
My one bit of advice is go talk to Beth if you need to hire. She's an expert.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the plug. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. And everybody out there, thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. By the way, we are looking for reviews. So if you think this is helpful, if you thought what Beth just shared was amazing like I did, please go review the show. Go tell people that this is awesome so that other people can find it. You can help others. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Scale Your SaaS. For more help on finding great leads and closing more deals, go to mattwolach.com.